Hi, everybody, to PowerPoint 2 of Human Ecology. Hopefully you enjoyed Labster yesterday. You're watching this during lockdown or quarantine, I should say. We're still going to try to understand the impact of human activity, pro and con, on the environment. So here's today's warm-up. What are some of the consequences of global warming? So when you hit pause and take a minute to answer that on your assignment sheet. All right, so here they are. Some of the consequences: rising seas and coastal flooding due to the melting of polar ice caps. Now, just so you know, I'm not a global warming alarmist, although I do believe it's happening, and I do believe that we need to take precautions. And I think we'll fix it. I really do. If we're the cause. Part of me thinks it's cyclical, has to do with the sun and tilting of the earth, etc. I know I'm in the minority, but when they say most scientists agree in global warming, yes. When I was in college, we called it climate change, and that was 100 years ago. We knew something was going to happen. We were more concerned about a nuclear holocaust, actually, when I was growing up. So I had professors talk about it. I had one professor actually say he believes that if the polar caps start to melt, the permafrost, which is kind of in northern Canada and stuff, that will melt that, and that would act like a sponge. So, there's a lot of theories out there. Just so you know, the minority of scientists is in the number of over 30,000, and many of them have won Nobel Prizes. So just because you're not a global warming alarmist and you're in the minority doesn't mean you're wrong, because Galileo was in the minority. The scientist who discovered tectonic plates died before anyone would accept his theory. The person who came up with the Big Bang Theory was actually discredited by Einstein, who later had to apologize to that person. So being in the minority in science isn't always the bad place to be, which I'm sure I'm going to hear from people now, because this is going to be posted on YouTube. But we're just trying to keep it simple. So the seas should rise. Hopefully they'll get absorbed by the spongy permafrost. But New York City is planning on spending billions of dollars, at least before all this craziness happened, to build a wall around lower Manhattan to protect it from rising seas. There will be a change in precipitation, and we've kind of seen that already: droughts and crop failure. Not as quickly as it was predicted, but droughts do happen. So there was an interesting picture that I saw. It was from Long Island, and it was one of the lakes. Is it Lake Success on Long Island? That was completely dry, and everyone was actually blaming global warming. The reason for that picture is we sucked out all the water from the aqua filters because of overpopulation, and a lack of water from rain. But it's a double-edged sword sometimes, and people manipulate the statistics. We're definitely going to see a rise in insects diseases. We're seeing it already with ticks and stuff. So like this year, I was kind of excited that it was so cold so late. The snow cover had left, so I tried to blow all the leaves off my property to kind of expose some of the ticks. So when it did get cold, they would die. It's kind of a catch-22, because I have salamanders that grow as nymphs on my property, and they need the leaves as well. So I try to keep some leaves for them, because then they eat the mosquitoes and stuff that are in my pond. But that's one of the things that we will see, right? If insects don't die in the winter, we'll have an increase in disease. And we see it in tropical areas. There's high cases of malaria and stuff in tropical areas because insects don't die. So here's global warming. right? Here's some of the predictions. These are old pictures. I guess I should update them. So 2005, right? It's 2020, so it's 15 years old. The polar caps are increasing in size a little bit. So also, population of polar bears have increased in the same time too. So um, maybe all this stuff should be updated, right? Bush hasn't been president in a while. Anyway, so here are the effects of global warming, as we talked about. So it'll affect penguins and stuff as sea levels increase. Polar bears, they predicted would lose their habitat, and they kind of are, but they still are increasing in population, mostly because they're being protected better. And we're going to lose biodiversity, because when you lose species, you lose biodiversity. So what's the difference between acid rain and global warming? Well, acid rain is when we burn the fuels, the chemicals get into the atmosphere. This is the thing we really need to worry about, especially in the Adirondacks. So pollutants rise up into the clouds and they come back in the form of precipitation. Many of our industries are in middle America, like in Ohio, et cetera. So they don't want the pollutants in their neighborhood. So they build factories with really, really tall chimneys. So it goes into the clouds. Well, eventually it's going to have to come back down. So here's an example of how wildly or how things travel wildly. So we know that when they used to test nuclear weapons in Nevada, that the rain that landed in Troy was radioactive. We now know that, right? So that's how wildly these pollutants travel. So the west coast of the United States is being affected by the pollutants caused by the increase in industrialization in China. So I had a friend whose kid had really bad asthma, and they had to move from Southern California because of the pollutants. In California's bad because of cars, but it was increased because of China. So they had to move. They moved to the East Coast. And then what it does is these chemicals, they change the pH in the soils and the lakes and the ponds and the streams, right? So if you remember pH, and if the pH lowers past 7, it becomes acidic. Here are some of the things that cause it, right? So it's sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxides that cause this acid rain to form. It'll kill the trees. So here's an example of a forest that's killed by acid rain. Here's George Washington before and after acid rain. So if you go to Washington Square in New York City, if you attend NYU, it's right there. So George is, I think it's made from limestone. So the acid rain is kind of eating away at his skin. Here's a really crazy statistic. I don't know if you're going to be 40 by 2040. Will you? Probably not, right? Because you'll be like 35. So 20% of Adirondack lakes are biologically dead because of acid rain. They predict it's going to be 50% by the time you're 35, just from acid rain. Right? Kind of sad. So what other pollutants do we have? We have fertilizer, runoff. Fertilizers are washed into nearby waters and rain. Right? Everyone points to the poor farmer. It's actually the golf courses. Golf courses are the worst when it comes to fertilizer. Right? Think about it. How do they keep that grass so green? There was a law passed when I worked at the Suffolk County Legislature on Long Island that the county golf courses could no longer fertilize. And then people stopped going to the county golf courses because they were no longer green and nice. And then I'm sure they changed the law because they lost revenue. But I think they went organic. It causes algae blooms, which use up the O2 in the water, killing fish. Here's an example of an algae bloom on Long Island. That green stuff is algae that is floating up. So, Long Island, people pollute. There's 1.5 billion in Suffolk County alone. I think, did I say billion? Million. People don't realize Brooklyn is actually part of Long Island, although don't tell people in Brooklyn that. So, there's, I don't know how many millions of people in Brooklyn. There's 1.5 million people in Nassau County, which is the first non-urban county on Long Island. And then Suffolk County, which is supposed to be the rural county, has 1.5 billion. So there's about 5 million people on Long Island alone, maybe. So there's going to be a lot of pollution. So that runoff from people, golf courses and front lawns, etc., get into the ocean and then cause these crazy algae blooms. And there's thermal pollution from factories, right? You ever go to New York City and it's just freakishly hot in the summertime? Well, buildings hold all that radiation and then from the sun and then give it off. But it affects the waters and stuff, kills aquatic plants and certain animals. Obviously, there's noise pollution from cities and roadways, scare away animals, especially animals that have to migrate. It affects them. Garbage dumping, right? Need I say more about that? There's chemical waste from ozone from factories that deplete our ozone. Now, depleting of the ozone is different from global warming. All right, different chemicals cause it. So try not to get those two confused. When our ozones are depleted, more UV rays come in, which means more cancer, more damage to plants. And then there's CFCs, which are used in aerosol cans. Right, so those are the aerosol cans that cause the depletion of the ozone layer. Just so you know, they were outlawed in the United States in like the 1970s. We're still talking about it, but that's how long they've been outlawed for. But we still do use CFCs and other things like air conditioners, etc. All right, there's not a lot of room between us and space, 50 kilometers. That's not a lot, right? So pretty much from my house in Queensbury to Fort Anne, and then we're in space. Now everyone knows I live in Queensbury, right? So definitely can't make this public. So there's layers of O3, that's ozone, right? We breathe in O2, but ozone is O3. So that's what blocks the sun's radiation from coming in. Different from global warming, right? Global warming is carbon dioxide that builds a layer kind of like a greenhouse. We need some type of protection. And that's what the O3 does. But O3 allows the heat to dissipate at night or dissipate. Carbon dioxide doesn't. So O3, ozone, protects us from the UV rays that would kill us, the radiation, because the sun is giving off radiation. That's why we're warm. The carbon dioxide doesn't allow the heat to leave once it's in. Two different things. Okay. So just those are some of the things that I want you to remember. After a thunderstorm, when you smell that odor, there's like a weird odor in the air. I don't know why I'm whispering, but I am. That's ozone. You're smelling ozone. Deforestation, we used to clear cut all the time. We don't really do that much in the United States anymore. Definitely don't do it in the Adirondacks. We're more practical, but we do have to build houses and stuff like that. So we will clear cut everything. And then we build track housing and stuff. We don't really see it much here, but well, you do in Queensbury and definitely Glens Falls. Long Island's crazy. California, I never really realized how crowded California was until I flew home to Long Island after my first year in California, and Long Island didn't look crowded anymore. And I was like, oh my goodness. All right, so what do we call all this? We call it industrialization, right? This is like the California track housing that I'm talking about. We call this poltergeist housing. So if you ever saw the first movie Poltergeist, your parents might know what I'm talking about. Just miles and miles and miles of just housing that looks the same. So obviously they had to clear all this land, and then they'll put a couple of bushes. Oh, we'll save some trees, make people feel good about themselves. So let's wrap this up. Increased industrialization will most likely A, decrease available habitats, B, increase environmental carrying capacity for native species, C, increase the stability of ecosystems, or D, decrease global warming. Today, you are a ecology superstar. Hope that was helpful. Have a great day.